Well, thank you for joining today on a Monday, and I'm sorry for not being able to have Friday's class. And thank you again for joining. Well, this is gonna be a makeup class for the one that we were supposed to have on Friday. So we'll be doing what we were supposed to do on Friday. Please practice the third task of the speaking section, right? Yeah, on Thursday we saw task number 3. Tuesday we saw task number 2. So Friday we were supposed to be practicing task number, and that's what we're going to be doing today. Okay? Is that okay? Do you guys have any questions before we start? I'm sorry, I was without my headphones on. Could you hear what I just said? No, you didn't hear anything? Okay. I'm so sorry. So what I was saying is basically, I'm sorry for not being able to have Friday's class. And I wanted to thank you too for joining today. Today, we're basically going to be doing what we were supposed to do on Friday, which is practicing. We'll practice task number 3 that we saw on Thursday. Okay? Is that okay? Do you guys have any questions before we start? Nope. Okay, great. So, do you guys remember how task number 3 was? I know it's not gonna be as fresh. So, can anyone please remind us what it was about or what we had to do here?
We have to read a short test and then listen and 2 examples.
Yeah, exactly. So you have to read a short text. It's an academic text, usually psychology, biology, and business. And then you have to listen to a lecture where the professor will give you real world examples or example of that concept that you read about. Could be 1 or it could be 2, right? It depends. That's what we're going to be doing today. So get ready. We will start practicing right now. Let's start by doing this one here, psychology, and we'll try to do 1 of each. So remember that you have 45 seconds to read the text. So please, you may start reading now.
Now listen to part of a lecture on this topic in a business management class.
So, let me tell you about my own experience with this when I was working for a computer company a couple of years ago. So, one day a coworker and I suggested we should give our computers a design makeover, make them look more up to date. Market research was showing that new customers said they would be more interested in buying our computers if they looked cooler. Our technology was advanced, but the outside design looked really old-fashioned. At first, more than half the group supported us. There were a few senior managers there, though, who didn't support the design change. One of the senior managers said, "Our focus has always been on technology. Changing the look is an unnecessary cost." Almost immediately, some of our supporters changed their minds. Even my coworker changed his mind. When I asked him why after the meeting, he told me he didn't want to make a bad impression on the senior managers. He thought that disagreeing with them might jeopardize his chances of getting a promotion by not looking like a team player. What about me? I hate to admit it, but after a few hours of discussion, I started wondering if it was worth everyone's time to argue about this. As more people sided with senior management, I started to feel like I was the only one holding up the vote. Everyone else seemed to think change wasn't necessary, so as more people sided with senior management, I started to feel like I was the only one holding up the vote. Everyone else seemed to think change wasn't necessary, so I voted against my own idea in the end. So we unanimously decided to stay with the current old-looking design. But this decision ended up costing us a lot of money. That same year, our competitor came out with a new design that attracted some of our customers and prevented us from profiting on potential new customers.
Okay. So the question says, explain groupthink and its effects using the example of the computer company. You will now have 30 seconds to prepare your responses. Okay, guys. So please, maybe we could start with Ricardo. You may start speaking now.
Groupthink consists on voting in order to make a decision that can benefit everyone. In this case, we have an example related to a computer company that wanted, according to one of the employees, to deliver a design makeover to make the product cooler in order to sell more computers. Nevertheless, despite half of the group agreed, the other half didn't agree, and due to one of the bosses, the half that agreed changed their mind, and in the end, the only one holding up the vote was left alone. He ended up voting against his own idea. So this can be problematic.
Okay, all right, Ricardo. So it wasn't bad. I like that although you changed the template, you kept the structure, so it's great. You first of all talked about what groupthink is. You gave a short definition, or short, 15 seconds, and then you explained the example. So the structure is good. Now some tips I can give you. The first one, make sure that the key part here for this task is always understanding the definition from the reading. You get that correct, then it'll be easier for you to understand and explain the lecture. So in this case, you said groupthink consists in voting for a decision that benefits the entire group. Are you sure that's what groupthink is?
Not entirely.
Not really, right? Where did you find the definition? What makes you think it's that?
The first sentence, I think.
Okay, so it says it's one process by which groups make bad or irrational decisions. So that's actually the correct definition, right? It's when it's a process in which groups, as a group, make bad decisions. Usually because they are trying to follow somebody or trying to follow the other person, right? That's what they explain here. So make sure that you catch that definition here. And once that you get this, the most important part of the example will be what is related to this. So you explain the example of the computer company. Now, in terms of the example, make sure that you try to be as accurate as you can be. So in this case, you talked about it like it was a like not a specific company, right? An ex company where somebody who we don't know who he is voted against his own vote and stuff, but we know that it was the professor that was speaking, right? Try to mention him. Try to be as accurate as you can with the example. So in the example, we hear that the professor was working in this computer company and he and his coworker proposed a makeover for the design of the computers, right? And at first, as you explained, half of the group agreed, but the senior managers were not really in favor of the proposal. So everyone else ended up changing their minds because they didn't want to look bad with the senior managers. And even the professor changed his vote, right, and voted against his own idea because he was following the group. And this was a bad decision because at the end of the day, it ended up costing them customers and money, right? And the profit that they could have earned, makeover. So that is going to be the focus, right? You need to explain how this as a group, how they as a group made an irrational decision following somebody else, following the leader of the group. Okay?
Okay, teacher.
It was more something related to the content. Make sure that you catch the definition and that you focus on how that example relates to this.
All right.
Do you guys have any questions? Okay, then let's continue. Okay, here. This one is interesting. So remember, same thing, you will have 45 seconds to prepare your responses. Sorry to read.
Now listen to part of a lecture on this topic in a psychology class.
Okay, the first kind of memory, we're all very familiar with this, right? You probably remember what you had for dinner last night. You have a conscious memory of last night's dinner. So if I ask you, what did you eat last night, you could tell me. But these other kind of memories, implicit memories, they work differently. Let's take an example from the world of advertising. When you're driving along a highway, you see plenty of billboards, roadside advertisements. You certainly don't remember them all, but they still affect you. Marketing researchers have shown, well, to be specific, let's say there's a billboard on the highway advertising a car called the Panther. The ad shows a big picture of the car, and above the car in huge letters is the name of the car, Panther. A lot of people drive by the billboard. But ask those drivers later if they saw any advertisements for cars, and, well, they'll think about it, and a lot of them will say no. They honestly don't remember seeing any. They have no conscious memory of the Panther billboard. So, you ask these same people a different question. You ask, you ask them to name an animal starting with the letter P. What do you think they'll answer? Do they say pig? Pig is the most common animal that starts with the letter P. But they don't say pig. They say panther. The billboard had an effect, even though the drivers don't remember ever seeing it.
Now, using the example of the car advertisement, explain what is meant by implicit memory. Read the question. We'll now have 30 seconds to prepare. Okay, so please let's go with Valentina now. May start speaking now.
Okay. Implicit memory is one of the types of the memory that people have. In this case, the man was explaining that example that was when you are driving on a highway and you see a lot of billboards and you see pictures and huge letters in them, but you can remember exactly what was exactly in those billboards. But when you ask for a name an animal with letter P, they always say panther because they saw it in that billboards.
Okay, good. So nice. Structure was good. You talked about, I like the fact that you focused on implicit memory only, because I've had other students do this, and sometimes I get confused and try to explain both of them because the title was explicit and implicit, right? But I love that you actually paid attention to the question, and since they only asked about implicit memory, they only define implicit memory and use the example given by to illustrate that concept. Great. Your introduction was short. The way that you explained the example, honestly, you understood what it was about and you were able to explain it pretty well. The only thing I could tell you is kind of the same as I said to Ricardo. Make sure that you are a little bit more accurate, right? So you are generalizing the examples too much. So in this case, for example, you said the example is that you are driving on the highway and you see a lot of billboards, but you're not being specific enough or accurate enough with the example that the professor gave, right? So try to, if the professor said it in the third person, try to continue with that. So the professor, and don't forget to mention him, right? And mention the lecture too. You said the man who is speaking, which is correct, but it's better to refer to him as the professor. So in this case, the professor gives the example of somebody who's driving on the highway. They may see a huge billboard with huge letters on it. Give more details, right? Advertising a car named Panther, and they won't consciously remember it, so they won't be aware of that memory. But if you ask them, or if you ask this person to name an animal starting with the letter P, they'll probably say panther instead of pig, which means, and try to emphasize how this is an implicit memory, right? So which means that this memory, even though they're not conscious about it, had an effect on them, right? That's implicit memory. So those are some things I could say. Be more specific with the examples. Don't forget to mention either the lecture or the professor. And that's it. That was actually it. And always try to like emphasize a little bit more on the connection, right? So how is this an implicit memory? How is it an unconscious memory? Okay. Is that okay? Do you guys have any questions so far? All good. Okay. Okay, let's do this one here that isn't biology or psychology nor art. Let's take a look. Remember, you will have 45 seconds to read the text.
Now listen to part of a lecture in an art history class.
All right, so let's consider the work of the outsider artist Henry Darger. Darger lived by himself in a tiny apartment in Chicago in the 1900s. He had no friends and spent all his spare time there alone, creating hundreds of paintings and drawings. He had never formally studied art, and kept his work completely private, so no one ever saw it or responded to it during his lifetime. And so when you see Darger's work, you notice how unique it is. It doesn't remind you of anything you've ever seen before. It's very much his own. For example, one piece, it's a watercolor painting. In this piece, he illustrates a story about the adventures of 7 children. But see, Darger had a really hard time drawing human figures, yet he managed to come up with his own rather unique solution for the problem. He simply cut out pictures of children from newspapers and magazines and pasted them into his own painted illustration of trees, flowers, and grass. The results look a little strange. Darger's picture looks more cluttered, more crowded with details than the pictures of other artists, because its entire surface is painted and there are no spaces left empty. It's also a lot longer than the pictures of most other artists, about 9 feet long.
So explain why Henry Darger is considered as an outsider artist. Now you will get 30 seconds so you can prepare your responses. Okay. So please, Mateo, you can start now.
Okay. According to the passage, outsider art is defined as art made by people who choose to live and work outside society. In the lecture, the professor gives the example of Henry Darger, who lived outside nearby Chicago and had no friends and grew up with no real contact of people. His work is considered unique. The professor gives the example of a watercolor painting where he tells the story of 7 children, the adventure of 7 children, but he had a really bad time painting human figures. So he pasted pictures of people from magazines or newspapers.
Okay. Okay, Mateo, congratulations. I love your response. That was really good. Well done. So, I mean, the only thing is that you were missing some time, but it is a matter of practice. The more you practice, you'll get used to it. But you need to remember to look at the clock whenever you're finishing ideas and see how much time you have left. So, for example, you were introducing the example of the watercolor painting. And if you had seen the clock and you had seen that you'll have like 5 seconds, and you just said, that was a very strange painting, which is a good example of an outsider art, right? So try to see how much time you have left and form your response accordingly. But honestly, that was really good, almost perfect. I'd say great introduction, the definition was correct, and I loved how you emphasized the relationship between or you explained really, right? So why this artist was an outsider artist. He lived outside of society, no contact with other people. And the details you provided as well. No comments, careful with the time, and maybe careful with the grammar. Pay always specific attention to the tenses, right? When you're conjugating and talking about past examples. But it was really good, Mateo. Well done. Good answer. Okay, guys. So let's do another one. I don't know. Let's do this one here. So same thing, you will have 45 seconds to read the text.
Listen to part of a lecture in a psychology class.
Now, a study was done that illustrated this phenomenon. In the study, people were given an ordinary task that everyone has probably done before. They were simply asked to peel potatoes, and to peel as many potatoes as possible in a given amount of time. Okay, so some people worked alone, and they were told that the number of potatoes they each peeled would be recorded. Others peeled potatoes together as part of a group, and they were told that only the total number of potatoes peeled would be recorded. So it would be impossible to tell how many any one person had done. Then researchers compared the results of the people who worked alone and those that worked together to see if there was any difference. That is, they took the average score of the people working alone and compared it to the average score of the people working together in a group. And they did discover a difference. It turns out that people working as a group peeled significantly fewer potatoes than people who worked alone.
Using the example from the lecture, explain what social loafing is and how it affects behavior. Now you will get 30 seconds to prepare your response. Okay. So, Laura, please. Mr. Speaking now. I cannot hear you well. I don't know if it's me.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you.
With my microphone. Okay.
Okay, go ahead.
According to the passage, social loafing is defined as the decrease in personal effort, especially in a simple group task. In the lecture, the professor gives the example of an ordinary task, such as peeling potatoes, that was given to individual people and to other people working in a group. He explains that some people had to work alone, and the number of peeled potatoes was going to be recorded, and other people working together in a group, they were told that only the total number of peeled potatoes was going to be recorded. And there was a big difference when they found out the results. The The group people peel significantly fewer potatoes than people who work alone. Therefore, people who work in a group are less motivated and less efficient.
Okay, perfect. No, that was great. So I don't think I have any comments. Your introduction was good. The definition you gave was correct. The way you explained the example, although you gave a lot of details, I was maybe a little bit worried that you weren't gonna make it on time, but you did. You finished the example, you explained the most important part in the end, how the group that was working alone peeled more potatoes, right, than the group that was working as a group. So great. And I loved your conclusion by the end. So you introduced that concept from the reading, which explains why the results were like that. So well done. I really have no comments. That was nice. Okay, guys. Do you have any questions before we continue? Then let's take a look at this one here. It'll be the same. You'll have 45 seconds to read the article.
Now listen to part of a lecture on this topic in a zoology class.
Let's start with an example you may be familiar with. What's one thing dogs typically do when they feel threatened, when they want to protect themselves? That's right, they show their teeth. And when we see this, we know this behavior means basically stay away. Now, here's how this behavior became a recognizable warning. A long, long time ago, a dog sensing danger would get ready to bite whatever animal was threatening it. It started by baring its teeth, but the purpose of doing this was something very simple. The dog instinctively was making sure it wouldn't bite its own lips when it bit the other animal, okay? But what happened? Other dogs, other animals, over time, they learned that this teeth-baring always came before a dog was going to bite, and so they started to read it as a signal to be careful, to keep away or risk getting bitten. This scenario, repeated time after time, also led to the dog's awareness that by simply showing its teeth, a lot of the time that was protection enough. What had been a simple physical preparation to bite had developed into a kind of defense mechanism in and of itself. The dog learned it did not need to actually attack, but could get the right result from just communicating the possibility of an attack through showing its teeth. It started to use this behavior as a warning signal.
Explain the concept of ritualization using the example of dogs discussed by the professor. Now you will get 30 seconds to prepare your response. Okay. So, David, you there? You there, David? Okay, what about you? Anna, you there?
Yes, teacher.
Okay, then please, you may start speaking now.
Okay, and the professor explained the concept of regulation in the dogs. For example, the change on the behavior that they can develop with some behavior in the enter. For example, the behavior of the dogs with a bag and the possibility of attack. There are something in their instinct that makes feel careful, and they produce possible attack, and that in and like this he explained the way of the some behaviors make a result that could be a regulation.
Okay, all right, Anna, good. Okay, so what can I say? First thing, try to keep the structure. Remember that in the beginning, during the first 15 seconds, you need to actually give the definition that you get from the reading, right? So start by saying, according to the text or according to the passage, ritualization is, and then tell me what it is. What do you remember from that? What is ritualization?
If I remember good, in the ritualization, it's what a behavior in animals that it's development in response of some behavior or change in the ambient.
Okay. Are you sure? Can anyone help you with the definition? What is ritualization according to the text?
Okay.
Says it's a behavior that originally had a practical purpose and developed into only a communicative one. Right? So it originally was useful for something, but now it just communicates a message. So based on that, then you need to explain the example, right? Here, the behavior they're discussing is how dogs, I think it's how dogs show their teeth, right? That's the behavior. The practical purpose was before they did this, in order when they were getting ready to bite, they did this in order not to bite their own lips, right? They were avoiding biting themselves, so they showed their teeth first before attacking. And now that has turned. Over time, they have seen that they don't actually need to attack. It's enough with just like making it look like they're going to attack. So that behavior that originally had that purpose of not biting themselves is now just a communicative behavior because it serves the purpose of sending a message, sending a warning, right, to other animals or to other animals. So based on that definition, then it is that you have to look for the important things in the example and explain this. But aside from the content, one tip I'm going to give you is I'm noticing that you're making a lot of pauses to think, right? And you're using this filler phrase a lot. So careful, that can make it a little bit hard to understand what you're saying at times. So practice speaking and try to stop yourself from making too many pauses. So every time you're going to use one of those filler words, try to correct it at the time. And try to also record yourself so that you see how you're speaking and you realize maybe you need to slow down a bit. Maybe it is because you're trying to speed up too much and speak too fast. You don't need to speak too fast. You can make it on time if you skip the details and focus on the most relevant information. So try to explain it a little bit more calmly and maybe that can help. Okay, but try to practice recording yourself and seeing how many pauses you're making. Is that okay, Anna? Do you have any questions?
No, teacher. I think that's clear. Thank you. I'm gonna practice.
Okay, Anna, thank you. Do you guys have any questions? Does anyone have any questions? Or we continue? Was that unclear? It was a little bit difficult, right? It was, I mean, the definition was maybe a bit long to summarize, but it was there. So let's take a look at, we haven't done, all right, here. Okay. So you will have 45 seconds to read it.
Now listen to part of a lecture on this topic in an environmental science class. So, one example of this is the macaw, the great green macaw. Now, the great green macaw is a beautiful bird, a fairly large-sized parrot known for its colorful feathers. Gorgeous green feathers with some red and blue feathers too. The macaw lives in the South American rainforest, in a part of the rainforest where a lot of trees had been cut down, trees that the macaw relies on for its food and nesting. So the macaw was in trouble. And, of course, along with the trees, a lot of other animals were in trouble too. Lots of birds, bats, and frogs also lived in these trees. So, when the trees were cut down and cleared away, these animals also didn't have a place to live anymore, and their populations drastically declined. So, what a concerned group of people in the area did was they started spreading the word about how the macaw, this really beautiful bird, needed help. They made little books with information about the macaw, with pictures, full-colored pictures of the macaw that showed off its beautiful feathers. And they passed out these little books, these informational brochures. They distributed them to people in schools and community centers in the area. And a lot of people responded. They contributed money and helped the group set up some protected land, a special area where no one could cut down the trees, so the macaw would be safe. And the macaw's population started to increase, and other birds and bats and frogs came back to the area too. Their numbers increased along with the trees.
Using the example of the macaw from the lecture, explain the concept of a flagship species. You will now have 30 seconds to prepare your response. Okay. So who wants to go? Does anyone want to go and try? Nobody?
I can give it a try.
Great, Mateo, go ahead, please.
Okay. According to the passage, flagship species occurs when a particular species represents a threatened habitat. In the lecture, the professor gives the example of the macaw. He explains that this great green bird lives in the South American rainforest, a habitat where trees were cut down and the macaw and other animals declined their population. So, in order to create public awareness, environmental organizations use the macaw's image, giving them a great result in this, giving them a great result.
Okay, great, Mateo. So now you finished on time, and I think it was because you saw the crowd, right? So you saw you didn't have that much time. You were wanting to explain more about what the macaw did for the other animals, but you had a great closing phrase. So that was perfect, Mateo. Well done. I have no comments. I love the way you summarized the definition. So you said it occurs when one species is used to represent a threatened area, right? Or other species. And you mentioned the important details from the example. You emphasized on how the habitat in the other animals were in danger too. And the macaw was only used to represent the whole population. So I have no comments. Well done. Your grammar was good too, and you made it on time. So that was really good. Well done. Nice. Any questions so far? Okay, let's look at this one that seems different. So you guys will have 45 seconds to read the text.
Now listen to part of a lecture from a sociology class. Now, the invention of the telephone was revolutionary. It was a much easier and faster way of communicating than anything else available at the time. However, when the telephone first became widely available towards the end of the 19th century, only businesses used telephones because businesses realized how the telephone could benefit them, how it could help them be more productive. But a lot of people in the general public didn't think the phone should be used for personal communication. Some people didn't like to listen to someone's voice without being able to see them. Also, a lot of people thought that it was rude to call someone on the telephone instead of visiting them in person. They missed the sense of personal connection they got from meeting someone. However, as we all know, people gradually changed their minds about the telephone. It took about 30 years, but eventually most homes came to have telephones, and everyone came to depend on them. Talking to someone you couldn't see began to seem more and more normal. Friends began to call each other just to chat, just for fun. And after everyone agreed on certain rules of politeness, such as not calling someone late at night, no one considered it rude anymore to make personal phone calls.
Using the example of the telephone, explain the concept of culture and lack. We'll now have 30 seconds to prepare your responses. Okay, so who wants to go?
Can I try?
Yes, sure, Nora. Please go ahead.
According to the passage, cultural flag is a period of transition when people are adjusting to technological change. In the lecture, the professor gives the example of the invention of telephones, which was revolutionary at first. He explains that when it first became available in the 19th century, it was only used by businessmen, and people didn't really want to use it for personal communication since it was rude to call instead of visiting, and it didn't allow personal communication. Then it gradually, people gradually changed their minds. It took over 30 years, but now most homes have telephones and it's completely normal. Friends got used to call each other for fun, and no one considered it rude anymore. So at first they had a negative attitude, and then it changed over time.
Great, perfect. So well done. No comments either on this one. Great introduction. You had your definition correct. So it's a period where people are adjusting to technological changes. And that way that you explained that the telephone invention was good too. You made that contrast between how people saw it in the beginning when it first came out and how people see it now. And I also loved your short closing idea where you connected it back to the reading and mentioned that part of how the attitude changed. So no comments. Well done. What do you guys think? Do you have any comments or do you have any questions? Is everything okay? Everything clear about this third task of the speaking section? Nice. So tomorrow we'll be starting something new. We'll move on to task number 4. And I wanted to apologize again for not being able to have Friday's class. And thank you again for joining today. Please, before you go though, don't forget today's survey. And I'll see you guys tomorrow night.
Thanks, teacher. Bye.
Bye, teacher. Thank you.
Bye,
Thank
teacher.
you, teacher.
Thank you.
Bye.
Yes.